The alarm blared across Nexus Station, its shrill tone cutting through the usual buzz of commerce and conversation. Thousands of beings from dozens of worlds froze mid-stride, their attention drawn to the center of the main concourse where a single human woman stood perfectly still. Around her, a towering blue-skinned Vraxian security officer circled with deliberate predatory steps. Lieutenant Amara Chen kept her breathing steady as Commander Krell stalked around her. She focused on the polished floor beneath her standard-issue boots, refusing to show the humiliation burning inside her. At 6'8", the Vraxian loomed over her 5'4" frame, his uniform adorned with medals and insignia that caught the station's artificial light. Documentation invalid. Commander Krell announced loudly, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly silent concourse. His 4 nostril slits flared with what seemed like satisfaction. Your kind always thinks you can go anywhere you please. The growing crowd of onlookers, reptilian saurians with their iridescent scales, gaseous vapori contained in their environmental suits, 8-eyed octarans, and dozens of other species, watched the scene unfold. Some moved closer, while others activated recording devices on their wrists or held small floating camera drones aloft. Amara straightened her shoulders, her dark eyes meeting Krell's yellow ones directly. My credentials are authentic, officer. I'm Lieutenant Amara Chen, xenolinguist aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony. I've been granted full access to Nexus Station for shore leave and cultural exchange. Her voice remained calm and professional despite the flutter of anger in her chest. 6 years of diplomatic training had taught her that showing emotion in situations like this only made things worse. Commander Krell's mouth stretched into what passed for a Vraxian smile, a tight, lipless expression that revealed rows of small, pointed teeth. Humans, he said with clear disdain. You all look the same with your soft skin and bilateral symmetry. This ID could belong to anyone. He held up her identification chip, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. The holographic image of Amara rotated above the chip, a perfect match to the woman standing before him. This is clearly falsified, Krell continued, ignoring the obvious match. Humans think their recent admission to the Galactic Council gives them special privileges. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Humans were indeed newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 30 Earth years ago. Many older species still viewed them with suspicion or contempt. Officer, if you check with station control, they can confirm my identity and clearance, Amara suggested, keeping her voice steady. The Harmony docked yesterday at 600 hours, Bay E-17. Krell's 4-fingered hand shot out, grabbing Amara's shoulder badge. With a swift motion, he tore it from her uniform, the sound of ripping fabric audible in the tense silence. Contraband, he declared, tossing the badge into a small hovering containment field that followed him on his patrols. The badge hung suspended in the blue energy field, rotating slowly. Unauthorized species insignia. Amara felt her cheeks grow hot. The badge had been a gift from the Harmony's captain after she had successfully negotiated a peace agreement between 2 warring moons in the Proxima system. The delicate silver pin depicted Earth and its single moon, with tiny diamonds representing stars. That badge is a personal item, not contraband, she said, her voice tightening despite her efforts. It has sentimental value. A tall bird-like avian stepped forward from the crowd. Commander, I recognize this human. She assisted my delegation last cycle with translation during the trade conference. She is who she claims to be. Krell's head swiveled toward the avian, his neck ridges darkening to a deep indigo. A sign of Vraxian anger. Return to your business, citizen, or I'll detain you for interfering with security operations. The avian hesitated, then bowed slightly and stepped back, eyes downcast. Now, Krell continued, turning back to Amara, you will come with me to the detention center until we can arrange transport back to your planet. Earth, correct? Or was it Mars? One of those dust balls humans infest. I have diplomatic standing, Amara stated firmly. Under Galactic Convention Article 7, You must contact my commanding officer before detaining me." Krell laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the concourse. Several smaller alien species flinched at the noise. Diplomatic standing. For a translator. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Your species has barely learned to leave its solar system. You don't understand how things work out here among the stars, little human." He gestured to two junior officers who had been standing nearby. "Take her to holding cell 3. Full decontamination protocols. These humans carry all sorts of bacteria." As the officers approached, Amara maintained her dignity. She would not give this bully the satisfaction of seeing her struggle or plead. She knew station regulations better than most and understood that this treatment violated at least 7 different protocols. The officers flanked her, their shock batons at the ready, though she showed no signs of resistance. As they led her away, the crowd of onlookers parted, many averting their eyes or turning away from what felt like an injustice, but what no one was willing to challenge. Little did the arrogant officer know that in exactly 12 hours, the Vraxian High Command vessel would dock at Nexus for the most important diplomatic summit in a decade. And sitting at the head of the human delegation would be Admiral Darius Chen, Supreme Commander of the Human Alliance Fleet, and Amara's husband of 3 years. The same Admiral Chen whose negotiation skills had recently prevented a war between the Vraxian Empire and the Centauri Coalition, saving countless lives on both sides. The same Admiral Chen whom now held the deciding vote on whether the Vraxian Empire would receive access to advanced Earth terraforming technology. As Amara was escorted toward the detention area, her thoughts weren't on revenge, but on the diplomatic fallout this incident might cause. Peace in this sector was fragile, and she had dedicated her life to building bridges between species. Even as Commander Krell's mistreatment stung, she was already thinking about how to turn this unfortunate encounter into an opportunity for greater understanding. "Sir, there's a situation involving your wife on Nexus Station." Admiral Darius Chen looked up from the peace treaty draft, his face a perfect mask of calm. Not a single muscle betrayed the sudden spike of concern that shot through him at the mention of Amara. 3 alien dignitaries from the Centauri delegation watched from across the polished obsidian table, their large, reflective eyes missing nothing. Lieutenant Commander Patel stood at perfect attention beside the Admiral's chair, having delivered the news in a carefully measured tone. The young officer's eyes darted briefly to the dignitaries, then back to his commander. "Continue the negotiations as scheduled," Darius said, his voice steady and authoritative. He set down his stylus with deliberate care. "The Centauri delegation deserves our full attention. We can address station matters afterward." The tallest Centauri, Ambassador Thrix, tilted her elongated head. The translucent membranes over her eyes flickered, a sign of respect in their culture. "Admiral Chen, if personal matters require your attention, we would not be offended by a brief recess," she offered, her translator converting her high-pitched tones into standard human speech. Darius smiled diplomatically. "Thank you for your consideration, Ambassador. However, this treaty represents months of careful negotiation. The stability of 3 star systems depends on our work today." He gestured to the holographic star map hovering above the table. "Let us continue with Article 7 regarding mining rights in the asteroid belt." For the next 4 hours, Admiral Chen guided the discussions with his characteristic precision and insight. None of the aliens could detect any change in his demeanor or focus. He asked thoughtful questions, proposed elegant compromises, and even shared a ceremonial drink with the Centauri representatives when they finally reached agreement on all 17 articles. Only after the delegates had departed did Darius allow his composure to slip. "Show me," he ordered as the door sealed shut. Lieutenant Commander Patil activated the room's display screen. The incident occurred 6 hours ago in the main concourse of Nexus Station. This footage was captured by station security and by several bystanders. The screen filled with the image of Amara standing rigidly as the Vraxian security officer circled her. Though the footage had no audio, the scene told its own story. The crowd of onlookers, the officer's aggressive posture, the moment when he tore the badge from her uniform. Darius watched in silence, his breathing carefully controlled. When the recording showed Amara being led away by security officers, he finally spoke. Status and location. She's being held in a detention cell in Nexus Security Wing, Paddle reported. Officially for documentation irregularities, though her credentials were completely valid. We've confirmed this with 3 separate verification systems. Now alone in his quarters, Darius reviewed the footage again. His hands trembled with controlled anger as he paused on the Vraxian officer's face. Commander Krell. The name was now burned into his memory. He could send warships. The Harmony and 3 destroyer-class vessels were within range of Nexus Station. He could demand immediate justice, leveraging his position as Supreme Commander. The Vraxians would have to comply. They needed Earth's terraforming technology, too desperately to risk offense. Instead, he sat at his desk and began to file the proper complaints through diplomatic channels. His fingers moved across the holographic keyboard with practiced efficiency as he cited the relevant Galactic Convention articles violated in this incident. Darius knew that handling this properly would accomplish far more than a show of force. Humans were still proving themselves on the galactic stage. How they responded to provocation mattered. Meanwhile, on Nexus Station, Amara sat in a detention cell that was clearly not designed for human comfort. The ambient temperature was set for cold-blooded species, leaving her shivering slightly in her uniform. The lighting glowed in spectrums at the edge of human vision, creating a constant, subtle headache. But Lieutenant Amara Chen wasn't idle. "You have served on this station for many cycles," she asked in perfect Krivian, the complex consonants and tonal shifts flowing naturally from her lips. The Krivian guard looked up in surprise, his spined crest raising slightly in what humans had learned was an expression of astonishment. He had been standing outside her cell for 3 hours, never speaking, barely moving. "You speak the mother tongue," he replied in his own language, stepping closer to the energy barrier. Amara smiled. "I am a xenolinguist. Languages are my life's work." The guard's name was Trellvox, she learned. He had been born on a mining colony in the outer systems and joined station security to see more of the galaxy. This was his first posting. "Your pronunciation is perfect," Trellvox said, his voice containing the musical undertones that indicated pleasure in Krivian communication. "Most species cannot manage our speech patterns." "The triple tonal system is challenging," Amara admitted, "but beautiful once you understand its logic." Over the next hour, they spoke of his homeworld, of the ancient Krivian poetry he had studied as a youngster, and of his adjustment to life on the station. When he mentioned feeling thirsty, Amara asked about the water conservation practices on his arid home planet. Moved by her genuine interest in his culture, Trellvox glanced around quickly, then deactivated a small portion of the barrier to pass her his water ration. "Your species requires more hydration than mine," he said quietly. "This is not protocol, but it seems right." Amara thanked him with a traditional Krivian gesture of gratitude, pressing her fingertips to her forehead and then extending her hand palm up. In another section of the security wing, 2 shift supervisors were reviewing surveillance footage. "The human female in cell 7, one said, pointing to a monitor. "She's been conversing with guard Trellvox for over an hour." "In Krivian?" the other asked, adjusting the audio settings. "That's impossible. Their vocal structures can't produce those sounds." They watched in amazement as Amara switched effortlessly to the supervisor's native Melbrani when he entered the detention area, greeting him with a traditional honorific rarely used by outsiders. Within hours, word spread through the station about the detained human who could speak 14 alien languages with perfect accent and cultural nuance. Security officers from different shifts found excuses to pass by her cell. A Dorn Age ambassador, hearing rumors, demanded to see this linguistic phenomenon for himself. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Commander Krell received a priority message from his superior. The detained human was to be transferred to more appropriate quarters immediately, though she would remain under technical custody until her documentation could be re-verified. What Commander Krell didn't know was that a secure transmission had already been sent from Admiral Chen's vessel, scheduled to arrive at Nexus Station in exactly 6 hours for the Galactic Summit. And attached to that transmission was a complete dossier on Lieutenant Amara Chen, including her marriage certificate to the most powerful human military officer in the sector. Commander Krell stood at attention near the main docking port of Nexus Station, his blue skin polished to a shine for the occasion. Around him, 24 other Vraxian security officers formed a perfect line, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the bright lights. The imminent arrival of the Vraxian High Command shuttle had the entire station buzzing with energy. This was no ordinary diplomatic visit. The treaty being negotiated today would reshape power throughout the sector, with the Vraxians positioned to gain control of 3 key trade routes. Commander Krell felt a surge of pride knowing he had been personally selected for the security detail, a great honor that reflected his standing within the station hierarchy. "Incoming vessel on final approach," announced the station's AI in its neutral voice. Docking procedures commencing. Through the massive viewport, Krell could see the sleek, predatory shape of the High Command shuttle as it glided toward the station. Its dark metal hull was adorned with the ancient symbols of Vraxian military might, dating back thousands of years. "Prepare for ceremonial inspection," barked Chief Security Officer Vax. "The High Commander does not tolerate imperfection." Krell straightened his already rigid posture even further. His recent handling of station security, especially his firm approach with non-Vraxian visitors, had earned him praise from his superiors. Just 3 days ago, he had detained a human female attempting to use what he determined were suspicious credentials. The incident had earned him a commendation for vigilance from Station Command, another achievement to add to his impressive record. The shuttle completed its docking sequence with a soft hiss as pressure equalized between the vessel and the station. A series of chimes rang out, the traditional Vraxian welcome for dignitaries of high rank. The docking corridor illuminated with the ceremonial blue-gold lighting reserved for the most important occasions. Krell and the other officers inhaled deeply and held their breath in the traditional sign of respect as the doors slid open. High Commander Zrax emerged first, his massive frame adorned with medals and ceremonial scars of honor. Behind him came 6 senior Vraxian officials, each representing a different facet of their empire: military, commerce, science, territory, resources, and diplomacy. After the formal greetings were exchanged, the entire procession began moving toward the grand hall where the treaty negotiations would take place. Krell fell into step precisely 3 meters behind the High Commander, his assigned position of honor. As they entered the vast circular chamber of the Grand Hall, Krell noted that several delegations had already arrived. The insectoid Tresians clustered on the east side, their mandibles clicking in private communication. The crystalline Luxorians glowed softly in the west corner, their light patterns shifting in what appeared to be nervous patterns. And then, entering through the northern doors, came the human delegation. Krell's 4 nostrils flared slightly in disdain. Humans, the galaxy's newcomers, acting as if they belonged at this table of ancient powers. Their ship designs were unimaginative, their planets barely terraformed, their history a mere blip compared to the other species present. The human representatives filed in with their typical lack of proper ceremony. Krell counted 12 of them, a small delegation compared to most others in the room. They wore their standard blue and silver uniforms, simple compared to the ornate attire of older species. Then Krell's eyes widened as he spotted a familiar face among them. It was the woman he had detained 3 days earlier, the one who had claimed to be a xenolinguist. She now wore formal diplomatic attire, her dark hair arranged in an intricate style adorned with what appeared to be ceremonial earth metals. She moved with confidence, exchanging greetings with the Centauri ambassador as if they were old friends. Krell felt a momentary flutter of unease. How had she gained release from detention so quickly? And why was she among the diplomatic delegation? But it was the man beside her that made Krell's blood run cold. Tall for a human, with a commanding presence that seemed to draw the attention of the entire room, this man wore a uniform decorated with the highest honors of the human alliance. His face showed the weathered experience of someone who had seen conflict across multiple star systems, yet his eyes remained sharp and evaluating as he surveyed the room. One of his hands rested lightly on the small of the woman's back, a gesture of both protection and intimacy. Presenting the Human Alliance delegation, the Station A's voice boomed throughout the chamber. Led by Admiral Darius Chen, Supreme Commander of the Human Alliance Fleet and Special Envoy of the Earth President, the same surname as the woman he had humiliated, Krell felt his neck ridges darken involuntarily, the Vraxian equivalent of blood draining from one's face. This was impossible. The odds that the simple xenolinguist he had detained was connected to the highest-ranking human military officer were astronomical. Yet here they were. The High Commander turned slightly toward Krell. "You know of this human, Admiral?" he asked quietly, noting Krell's visible reaction. Before Krell could formulate a response, Admiral Chen guided his delegation directly toward the Vraxian contingent. Diplomatic protocol required this formal greeting before the negotiations could begin. "High Commander's Rax," Admiral Chen said, his deep voice carrying easily across the chamber. "The Human Alliance extends greetings and hopes for productive discussions." His pronunciation of the Vraxian title was flawless, clearly coached by someone with intimate knowledge of the language. As the formalities continued, Admiral Chen's gaze traveled across the Vraxian security detail, eventually locking with Krell's. There was no anger in those eyes, no obvious emotion at all, just a cool, calculating assessment that somehow felt more threatening than any display of rage. When Admiral Chen's eyes met his, Krell knew his career was over. 20 years of service, 3 promotions, countless commendations, all potentially destroyed by his treatment of this one human female. The formal introductions continued around the circle, each species greeting the others according to their customs. When they reached the point where the human and Vraxian delegations stood face to face, Admiral Chen extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting toward High Commander Drax. After completing this formality, Admiral Chen turned slightly, his gaze settling directly on Krell. "Commander Krell," Admiral Chen said smoothly, his voice betraying no emotion, "I believe you've already met my wife." The Grand Hall fell silent. Even the perpetually chattering Tresians ceased their mandible clicks. Lieutenant Amara Chen stepped forward, standing tall beside her husband. "Commander," she acknowledged with a small nod, her expression professional and composed. High Commander Drax's head turned sharply toward Krell, his upper ridges darkening with the beginning signs of anger. "Commander, explain this acquaintance," he ordered. Krell's throat felt suddenly dry. There was a security matter, 3 standard days ago. A routine documentation verification. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I believe the station logs categorize it as a detention for falsified credentials." Admiral Chen offered helpfully, his tone conversational, as if discussing nothing more significant than station weather patterns. "Though I understand those charges were quietly dropped after certain diplomatic communications were received." High Commander Drax's neck ridges now pulsed with a deep indigo color, a sign of extreme displeasure that every Vraxian in the room recognized immediately. "We will discuss this matter privately, Commander," the High Commander said, his voice dangerously quiet. "For now, you are dismissed from this detail." As Krell turned to leave, his career and reputation crumbling around him, Admiral Chen spoke again. "Commander, one moment." Krell froze. "I look forward to discussing station security protocols with you after the treaty negotiations," Admiral Chen said. "My wife speaks highly of your thoroughness." The explosion rocked Nexus Station without warning. One moment, diplomats from 12 worlds were celebrating the successful treaty signing in the Grand Hall. The next, a thunderous blast shook the entire structure, sending beings of all species stumbling for support. Lights failed across multiple sectors, plunging corridors into darkness, Before red emergency lighting flickered to life, the artificial gravity wavered, causing drinks, decorations, and smaller beings to float momentarily before crashing back down as systems struggled to stabilize. Amara Chen had been translating a toast between the Vraxian High Commander and a Luxorian elder when the blast hit. She instinctively reached out to steady the elderly crystalline being as alarms began to wail throughout the station. Emergency protocols engaged, announced the station I in 27 different languages simultaneously. Sectors 7 through 12 sealed due to atmospheric breach. All personnel initiate emergency response level 4. This is not a drill. Darius grabbed Amara's arm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, eyes quickly scanning her for injuries. "I'm fine," she replied, already shifting into emergency mode. The Luxorian delegation needs help reaching their evacuation point. Their movement is slow in standard gravity. Darius nodded. "I'll coordinate with station security. The Harmony can dock at emergency airlock E8 for additional evacuation if needed." Throughout the Grand Hall, panic threatened to erupt as hundreds of beings from dozens of worlds tried to understand what was happening. Some species were naturally prone to fear responses, while others became aggressive when threatened. The potential for chaos was enormous. Amara's translator training had included emergency response. She immediately moved to the center of the room and activated her comm unit's amplification function. "Please remain calm," she announced, her words automatically translated by the station's systems. "Follow your species-designated evacuation guides. If you cannot locate your guide, find any station personnel in blue uniforms." For the next 20 minutes, Amara helped coordinate the evacuation of the diplomatic wing. Her ability to speak directly to frightened delegates in their native languages proved invaluable, particularly with species whose translators had malfunctioned in the power fluctuations. She was directing a group of Melbrani dignitaries toward their evacuation point when her personal comm unit chimed with an urgent message. "Lieutenant Chen," came a breathless voice. "This is Security Officer Trelvox." Amara recognized the young Krivian guard from her time in detention. "Go ahead, officer." "Commander Krell is trapped in Sector 9 with 20 civilians, most of them children from the cultural exchange program. Life support is failing in that sector." Amara felt her stomach tighten. "What about emergency response teams?" "All teams are deployed to critical areas. The radiation leak in Sector 9 is making approach difficult. Standard protocols say to wait, but the atmosphere is venting slowly." "Those children," the young officer's voice broke slightly. "Where exactly are they?" Amara asked, already changing direction toward the emergency equipment storage. "Classroom C, near the hydroponics lab." The commander was giving a presentation on Vraxian culture when the explosion happened. Without hesitation, Amara grabbed an emergency kit from a wall cabinet and checked the contents: breather mask, radiation shield, medical supplies, and basic tools. "Lieutenant, what are you doing?" asked a station officer, watching her collect equipment. "All diplomatic personnel should be heading to secure areas." "Those children don't speak standard," Amara replied, securing the kit to her belt. "They need someone who speaks their languages, which is the fastest route to Sector 9 from here." The officer's eyes widened. "Lieutenant, the radiation levels are too high in that sector. The safety protocols." "Which route?" Amara repeated firmly. After a moment's hesitation, the officer pointed to a service corridor. "Maintenance Tunnel J14 will take you to the edge of Sector 9, but the emergency bulkheads are sealed. You'd need override clearance." Amara tapped her comm unit. "Admiral Chen, this is Lieutenant Chen. I need an emergency override for bulkhead access to Sector 9. There was a brief pause before her husband's voice replied. "Amara, that sector is reporting dangerous radiation levels. There are 20 children trapped with Commander Krell. No rescue teams available." She kept her voice steady, professional. "I can help." The massive bulkhead door slid open as they approached, revealing a scene of organized emergency response on the other side. Medical teams in protective gear stood ready with stretchers and equipment. Security personnel maintained order as worried parents and guardians waited anxiously for their children. Amara guided the Luxorian girl forward. As soon as they crossed the threshold, medical teams rushed toward them. Through her increasingly blurry vision, Amara saw Darius pushing through the crowd, his face tight with concern as he rushed to reach her. The last thing she remembered before collapsing was the feeling of strong arms catching her and Darius's voice saying, "I've got you." Amara woke in the medical bay 3 days later. The radiation exposure had been significant, requiring intensive treatment. Darius sat beside her bed, his uniform rumpled from having refused to leave her side. "The children?" she asked immediately, her voice barely above a whisper. "All safe," he assured her, taking her hand gently. "Thanks to you." "And Commander Krell?" Darius's expression softened slightly. "Recovering, 2 rooms down. He received a higher dose than you did." He paused, then added, "He asked about you every time he was conscious." Over the following weeks, as Nexus Station underwent repairs, something unexpected happened. The story of the human xenolinguist and the Vraxian security officer who had set aside their differences to save children from 6 different worlds spread throughout the station. It was picked up by news networks across 3 sectors, becoming a symbol of cooperation in a time when ancient prejudices still too often prevailed. Commander Krell's recovery took longer than Amara's, his Vraxian physiology more vulnerable to certain types of radiation. During this time, he received a steady stream of visitors, parents of the children he had helped save, station personnel who had witnessed his bravery, and, surprisingly often, Lieutenant Amara Chen. Their conversations, awkward at first, gradually evolved into respectful exchanges about their respective cultures. Krell's curiosity about humans grew, particularly about their rapid adaptation to galactic society after centuries of isolation on Earth. 1 month after the explosion, Amara stood beside her husband on the newly rebuilt grand platform of Nexus Station. The Interspecies Council had convened a special session, attended by representatives from 50 worlds. The agenda included not only the final ratification of the treaty, but also a ceremony to honor those who had distinguished themselves during the crisis. When Commander Krell approached the podium, a hush fell over the assembled dignitaries. His blue skin had paled from his ordeal, and he still moved with a slight limp, but his voice rang clear and strong through the chamber. "Distinguished representatives," he began formally, acknowledging each delegation with the proper gestures. "I come before you today not only as a security officer of Nexus Station, but as someone who has learned a profound lesson." He paused, his yellow eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Amara. "I was wrong," Krell announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "For many cycles, I judged humans by their appearance, by their brief history among the stars. I believed them weak and unimportant in the greater galactic community." Murmurs rippled through the audience. It was rare for a Vraxian to admit error so publicly. Their culture prized certainty and authority. When Lieutenant Chen risked her life to save mine and those children, I witnessed something I had not understood before. Krell's neck ridges flushed a deep purple, the Vraxian sign of deep emotion. "I learned that humanity's strength isn't in their weapons or technology. It's in their hearts." He turned to face Amara directly. "Lieutenant Chen could have left me to my fate. Few would have blamed her after how I treated her. Instead, she showed me that true power lies in compassion, in helping others regardless of past grievances." High Commander Zrax rose from his seat, a rare gesture during another speech. "The Vraxian Empire has much to learn from this example," he stated formally. "We propose the establishment of a permanent cultural exchange program to foster greater understanding between all species." The proposal was approved unanimously. The new Interspecies Cultural Exchange Center would be built in the heart of Nexus Station, designed to facilitate learning and cooperation among all galactic citizens. Its first director, appointed by joint agreement of all council members, Lieutenant Amara Chen.